Good evening, everyone. Planning Policy Commissioners, staff, and our watchful public. I would like to call the September 14th meeting of the Planning Policy Commission to order, and it is currently 6:30 p.m. Tonight's meeting is a hybrid meeting. The Planning Policy Commission is in person, but staff or members of the public may be attending virtually or in person. Attendance. Kristen, do we have a quorum this evening?
Yes, we do. We have two excused absences, Commissioner Kennedy and Commissioner Esmuede.
Excellent, thank you. Our first item of business is to do some basic things like approving our minutes from the July 13th and August 24th meetings. Has everyone been able to review the packets? Are there any corrections or concerns with the July 13th minutes? Hearing none, and hearing a nope, those minutes are approved. And the same for the August 24th meeting. Are there any concerns or corrections? All right, both sets of minutes are approved. Now our next item of business is public comments, and we will hold it at this time. Jared, has anybody signed up for them?
No one has signed up online or in person at this time.
Okay. Excellent. So tonight, our first order of regular business item as far as reviewing and the deliberation of the land use element, specifically the neighborhood planning for the comprehensive plan periodic update. Kristen, our senior planner, will be presenting tonight. Kristen, the mic is yours.
All right, good evening. I'm Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner with the Community Planning and Development Department. And yes, we're going to start with land use element and neighborhood planning in particular. So we did the land use element, and then we said we're going to bring this other part, land use planning, and insert it in. So we're just going to talk about those policies. The purpose is to review it and then address these questions. Do you have feedback regarding the proposed neighborhood sub-areas with maps? Do the proposed goals and policies address potential necessary topics for neighborhood planning? And are the topics not being addressed? And are there topics not being addressed in here? So starting with the map, the sub-areas were adopted back in 1995 with the original comprehensive plan, and there were 8 sub-areas at the time. And since then, since the city has annexed and sub-areas have changed, such as Central Issaquah, we now have 15. And this area right here, you can barely see the white on white, was the King County donut that I talk about. And it wasn't even annexed at the time, and now it has been. So the self-reflection or 2017 neighborhoods map was done as a part, we used to have a neighborhood outreach coordinator. And when she started here, she went out reasonably and worked with the community to say, what neighborhood do you identify with? And this is the map that was produced from that. Not officially adopted, but produced out of that community effort. So you can see kind of on here, the colors are the neighborhoods and the red lines are the sub-areas, and they don't line up. So these are used for planning purposes. We plan, we look at future planning using these sub-areas. The current planners use it to identify where projects are located. Other departments use it for other reasons. Communications still uses it when they reach out to neighborhoods. But it's really caused some problems internally and with the community. It's caused confusion and frustration. And there are places that no longer have sub-areas that are no longer in sub-areas because we changed the Central Issaquah boundary. We had annexed the King County donut. So we got to fix it. So, to do it, we have incorporated the community input from the 2017 map. We've addressed the 2018 changes to Central Issaquah. And we're also addressing, as I said, the annexation of the King County donut. So I'm going to go through these parcel or piece by piece. For Central Issaquah, the neighborhoods map had cut out part of the Newport area, which is actually zoned village residential and part of Central. It also took out Issaquah Valley, which is zoned MUR and in Central Issaquah. So we took those back into Central Issaquah because those have standards associated with them that are separate. Issaquah Highlands, we absorbed part of the King County area that was annexed. And it is all zoned, we also took part of the donut, but it's all zoned community facilities. And most of its community facilities open space.
What do you think, Kristen? Is this
You
a
can
pretty
ask them
quick
as we go, that's fine.
presentation?
It's fine if you want to do it now because
Okay. Yeah, Commissioner Milligan.
Yeah, thanks. This is where I had a question about the King County donut. I could see why you'd put it in Issaquah Highlands, but it seemed like it was not yet determined whether access, because of the utilities that are going in there now, are accessed by the road below.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I was just kind of wondering about how access might determine what neighborhood that's in and where that boundary line goes.
And it did determine some of these, so we can take another look at that and revisit it. Yeah. Excuse me, Issaquah Valley. We just took, as I mentioned earlier, we took out the portion that was in Central Issaquah and took it just south of Holly there. Oh, we also changed it. It was called Newport. I just said name change from, but it was a name change from Newport. Montreux, there was no change. And I realized that there are some parcels outside here in the neighborhoods map, but that area has since been removed from Issaquah. Newport, we removed the eastern portion that belongs in Central Issaquah. We also moved portions into the Tibbetts Creek Valley area. And it just, I know it looks weird. It will go across, just continues down that road. North Issaquah, it takes part of Central Issaquah. No, former part, I'm sorry, it takes the former part of Central Issaquah, part of the King County donut, and Lakeside as well. And most of these were identified this way. They identified with North Issaquah during the 2017 communication outreach that they did. And then it also removes Providence Ridge because, as Commissioner Milligan just pointed out, access comes from 43rd and 228. And they also have a trail that goes through those properties together. So that's why we removed that one.
Yeah, so same with Lakeside. I'm remembering that Lakeside is accessed from Highlands Drive and that the lower section remains industrial and not a neighborhood entrance. So just another look at that, whether, I mean, it seems so logical to put it in North Issaquah, but it was also orienting to Issaquah Highlands for another reason. I'm sorry, I'm just going off memory. That's just popping up in my head, bubbly. Lakeside's urban village that orients to the commercial that is in Issaquah Highlands doesn't provide much commercial of its own because it's so adjacent. So it's kind of part of a, I don't know. I don't know if I'd draw the boundaries around it, but I'm just saying.
Thank you. Old Town also takes in part of what used to be in Central Issaquah. And we had a conversation about this several years ago when we were doing the Old Town sub-area. And we were worried that, and the property owners were concerned that if they came into Old Town that they would have to comply with the Old Town design standards. But they're actually zoned, Old Town design standards apply to central or cultural and business district and multifamily. They do not apply to mixed use. So if they were to come into Old Town, the design standards would not apply to those businesses. It wouldn't be a rezone, it's just a change in boundary line. Providence Point, as I mentioned, took in Forest Ridge. South Lake Sammamish did not change except the name. It was Greenwood Point, now it's South Lake Sammamish. The residents actually asked for that because South Cove didn't like being called Greenwood Point, and Greenwood Point didn't like being called South Cove. So this was their compromise. Squawk Mountain, we took out part on the western side and put it in Tibbetts Valley, and a lot of that is because of the topography and the zoning. The zoning to the west, on the western part of that, is zoned single-family estates. So it's a much lower density than the single-family suburban that's currently in Squawk Mountain. And I'll show you in a minute, but the two zonings were different. We felt like the areas were different. When we planned for it, it's going to be different. And so that's why we took that out. And then we made some access corrections on the bottom east, on the northeast corner, southeast corner, and changing boundary lines to match up with parcels. Sycamore, this is where we made the adjustment because of access on Squawk Mountain. You cannot access this portion that's in blue right there from Sycamore, so we changed that to go to Squawk Mountain, and again, adjusted some boundary lines. In Tallis, we removed Forest Ridge. A lot of people, because it developed up there, think it is part of Tallis, and it's adjacent to it, but it's not. It was done as part of a development agreement. It's cluster housing, and it was done separately. So we took that out, and then the parcel that's in the sort of mustard color here was an expansion parcel originally for Tallis and is developing under their regulations. So because Tallis has design standards and regulations, we left that there and took out Forest Ridge. Gibbs Creek Valley. This was part of Squawk Mountain, the west side, and it was also part of, I can't remember what that was called, but it ran along Newport. But this is another one of those situations where the zoning is the same, is similar in these areas. They have environmental, critical areas, environmental constraints, and when we look at planning, we look at these more similarly. These are much more akin to each other than where they were before. So this is what the proposed neighborhoods map looks like. Everybody has a home now. And we will take, some of those comments regarding access into account. We've also sent this out to directors of other departments because it's not just our department that uses it. It's communications, public works, parks, they use it as well. So we've sent that out. So far, no comments back, but there may be changes as a result of that. So we also did policies. And this is one of those ones that I got wrong in the packet. But this is to set a template for when we go out and do individual neighborhood plans. What are things that we need to consider when we do those individual plans? This is not doing the plans, this is just preparing for that. Because we want everything to be consistent. We want to make sure that we're looking at all the same things with each of these neighborhoods. So, and this, I'm not sure where it'll fit yet. Right now we have it under, I think, under development patterns, but it's in the land use code. So the draft language for the goal Z, develop neighborhood plans that aim to establish welcoming, attractive, and walkable neighborhoods with various amenities that support the city's cultural and economically diverse community. Policy X11, wrong in the chart, but right in the element itself. Adapt guiding principles from the city's neighborhood planning guide for each neighborhood and develop new guiding principles as may be needed to address the unique interests and needs of each of the neighborhood's residents. I think the apostrophe is in the wrong place. Policy N3 isn't new. We just moved it down because it addresses neighborhoods specifically to allow for neighborhood small-scale hubs, retail, and personal services in residential areas. Policy X8, create 10-minute neighborhoods while maintaining a sense of open, welcoming, and inviting community with multimodal connectivity and accessibility. And 10-minute neighborhoods it's a fairly common term in planning, and you walk a half a mile anywhere. You can walk them a half a mile to parks, half a mile to services, half a mile to school. That's the idea of a 10-minute neighborhood, is that everything is walkable and convenient.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Is this for all 15 regions or only some of them?
This is for all of them. So we have sub-area plans right now for Central Issaquah and Old Town, and those get updated. So once those are updated, those would also.
How does that work in Squawk, where you can't anywhere up hill?
The proposal, so there's a proposal in the land use code. Well, and actually the one that we just looked at too, to allow for small scale. You're right, and for schools it may not work. For some things it may not work, but for parks it could. For small scale neighborhood services it could work. If we change zoning to allow those in there, then you can have that.
I'm just thinking more of the steep residential only neighborhood that you drop a ball, it ends up.
Right. And this isn't something to to put into every single plan, but it's something to consider in every
Okay.
single plan. We want to be sure that we're considering all the same factors for every neighborhood.
Because when the word create makes it sound like directive. I was wondering whether that was intended for all 15 or just as like reasonable efforts made, because some of them, in Issaquah Valley, it's very easy. In Palace should be easy, but like Squawk, for example.
Squawk may be harder because of
Yeah.
hills, but it's something we can't just ignore. We still need to talk about it because we have heard it in the past that people would like services closer.
Oh, I agree.
So,
Commissioner Milligan.
Commissioner Milligan, thank you. Commissioner Krass, I agree that the word create seems to be an order, not something to think about, but actually do it. So that word, and then I wondered about the 10-minute neighborhoods as a standard. We don't have it capitalized, but you do have it asterisk, and thought that I'm not against the philosophy here, but the verbiage, because if a 10-minute neighborhood, which I am not certain that it does, but if it comes to define something that requires certain elements in it, then you have to create a 10-minute neighborhood, then you have to have all of those things in it. Say schools are required, so you have to have an elementary school in every neighborhood, in a 10-minute neighborhood. I wouldn't be against that, but I would just want to say here that be mindful what you're saying if you're using a definition that we don't have control. I don't know if 10-minute neighborhoods is the right phrase. Somebody else, they're wordy people here. Others. Sure. I'm not saying I'm against using I'm not against having 10-minute neighborhoods. I'd love to. I'm just saying.
Right, the verbiage.
Be
create.
careful what you wish for. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Like you said, some of the topography, those things limit Sycamore. There's a few of them.
well, and developers, a developer may not come in and put something in there.
Right.
Yep.
It's consideration. Vice Chair Bader.
Yeah, I don't really have anything new to add other than like I saw this and I like loved it in theory and then was like how because I think even in Talus, which feels like it should have services, like there's nothing like in Talus, right? Like we are on an island up there with croissants and nothing else essentially.
It's a 10-minute walk down that hill.
It is. It's actually exactly 10 minutes from my house to the croissant place, but like everybody else down there, they're too far. And so, yeah, I don't know what that looks like in a place like Talus because there's not really like, I know there's like maybe some new development on that like landslide area, but like how does that happen? We need it desperately because you have to drive to get it to anything. Even like bike riding is hard, right? To make it up that hill is challenging. So, yeah, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but like I would love to see it, but don't.
It sounds like there's a lot of agreement, just the word create, like I said, but it sounds like Kristen's saying the intention is that it's really more about having the conversation. We're not treating different sub-areas, different neighborhoods differently just because not showing favorite. Commissioner Patterson.
Yeah, just to pile on, like I, again, love the idea of this. I think what stuck out to this particular policy to me is it seems very specific in like the measurement and what we're asking for here compared to the others are a little bit more broad, whereas this one kind of drills down to like, we need this one specific thing to happen. One consideration I'd have, which your comment just now made me almost backtrack on it, was, is this something that could be considered as a characteristic or criteria of certain neighborhoods that would lend themselves to it more? But then again, if we're treating them all equally, maybe that doesn't quite make sense. So I'm kind of struggling with where to go with this one, but I guess the specificity of it is what kind of, I think, makes me pause a little bit. But the idea behind it is great.
Okay.
Okay, since we're wordsmithing, and I don't normally do this. The intent is great. I understand the consistency. But instead of creating, it's really we're advocating for 10-minute neighborhoods. And by doing that, then it only becomes reality in the ones that make sense, as opposed to trying to be more directive in trying to fit something that doesn't fit, like in the top squawk. It could be just, you could either say create where it makes sense, or you could just use a different word like advocate, and then I think that's also a problem.
Okay, well, we'll take a stab at this one, not make it quite so specific, not use the word create, and maybe rethink the name 10-minute neighborhood. Okay, all right. Good feedback, thank you. All right, X9, celebrate the history and culture of each neighborhood through public art, signage, and wayfinding elements. I went to the Arts Commission meeting the other night to talk about the plan, and because they have the cultural element to work on it, I said, hey, maybe you could be a part of this one. With that. Policy X10, maintain and enhance each neighborhood's unique design characteristics through best practices in design and development regulations. Oop. Okay, there we go. So that's, yeah.
When it comes to this, John Crass, when it comes to development regulations, who sets those at the neighborhood? How does that work?
We would set them at, that's a tricky one, because some neighborhoods have HOAs. We were actually just talking about this today. Some neighborhoods have HOAs, and you can't really, those supersede
Providence
city's
Point,
regulations.
Talus, and Issaquah Highlands are probably
Mm-hmm.
multiple HOAs in each one, but those are more specific, probably versus some of the other ones. But
Right,
it-
and even, you know, this is bigger and it's not single family, but Central Issaquah has standards in place. Old Town has standards in place, but the Old Town standards were actually established by the city for Old Town at their request. They don't, you know. So that one's a little tricky, and design characteristics may be parks. Probably not single-family houses, but maybe it's, if you do have neighborhood hubs that come in, it's for the commercial structures, it's for the schools. So it may not be for single-family houses, it's just an overall feel.
I guess my question was more broad. When you have 15 neighborhoods, and we're saying each has their own best practices around design and development regulations, it opens up the question of who then is the creator and decider on what those development regulations are, and that need to be addressed, or is it?
Well, I mean, we would work with the residents, just like we did with Old Town, we would work with residents to figure out what those are, and then ultimately the city council would approve them if they're adopted into the code.
If I understand it, Chair Voice, if I understand it correctly, Kristen, the idea is that new development, they have to meet the standard, but they can go above and beyond with an HOA.
Yes,
But ultimately, they have to get that baseline. With
Right.
all of Issaquah Highlands. But like you said, basically an HOA for a new development could take those standards, be more aggressive.
right. So the city's already set the setback. We set on the, you know, front, sides, and rear. We set the height limits. Sometimes, you know, depending on what neighborhood you're in, we set the floor area ratio. We set the basic development on the ground standards. HOAs will often do paint colors. We do setbacks in some areas, but they may do setbacks. Or HOAs, I'm sorry. Not setbacks, modulation in like Central and in Old Town, but sometimes HOAs, you know, HOAs may not get that deep. It's more colors and height, I think, with HOAs and plantings.
But
and
like
so forth.
development regulations, setbacks and all that makes sense. The city sets those. Design for things that are like Old Town, totally get. But I'll use my example. I live in Issaquah Valley, which is a mixture of a whole bunch of different things. Will there be a design regulation for something that's kind of very mixed, or is it, once again, if appropriate? Because it's not an HOA and it's a whole bunch of different. So design is a subjective thing that people will have lots of opinions on. Development regulations, height, setbacks, and all that are much more straightforward. This is really design regulations. As I thought through this, if you're not part of an HOA and you have a mixture of a whole bunch of different stuff, then who decides and what's the process? And should you even have that, for example, a design one in some of these very mixed areas?
Can I get feedback from the rest of you on this one?
I think I understand what Commissioner Crass is saying, but again, like the way I see it is like it establishes a baseline. So I'm thinking like of Old Town when we this 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when we were looking at Craftsman, we were looking at paint colors. So they had a palette from which they could choose for that portion of the town. I think we said that Old Town can have funny colored doors. You know, they could have bright yellow doors, things like that. But you couldn't do that in every aspect of the city. So they can choose from a palette of different things. But ultimately, if you're an HOA, if you're part of 3 to 4 houses, then they're going to be a little bit more strict about what you can choose from in their development. So I kind of understand.
But a lot of areas are mixed where there's no HOAs.
Oh, yeah. No,
So
it's
I
a
could
hodgepodge.
I could paint my doors like zebra stripes, for example. I'm not I'm not an old.
But then you'd be directed by the standards of that particular development if they have it. Or if we came together and we said, like, this neighborhood wants X, Y, and Z.
Right, and I want to go back to, the city absolutely does not want to look at paint colors for every house that comes through the city. That's not what we are in the business to do. So we don't have the time to do that. We don't want to do that. People, you know, it really is more things like height. Maybe it's modulation, and I think it would be more for any commercial hubs that came into the area, for commercial development that came in, not so much for single family. We do have it for multifamily already in the code, not colors, but modulation and heights and.
Is a hot button, especially if you're not in, I mean, HOAs take care of that and you can decide whether that's constitutional. But when you're not in one, I just don't want to be seen as the city being in a business of design regulations in areas that are outside of it. I would call Old Town a special purpose, where most of the other ones are not.
Commissioner Altamore.
So I think for me, design is a little broader than maybe how you're describing it. Like, I think about the building that Top Hot Donuts is in. It's unlikely that that building would be built again today under current design standards. So not just the colors, but the shape. And let's say that when Homewood Suites or whatever that is, the Raleigh property went in, if they had wanted to make it like star-shaped and purple, or light it like T-Mobile, like that's where maybe some design pieces would have come in. So I feel like design is broader than what color is the paint, or is there Craftsman trim on it or something like that. But it's really sort of the look and feel of the structure itself, which is where there would be some design standards, even if it is in a mixed-use area.
So the city would then decide, I want to build a building in one of these areas, what the shape of the building is, or is it just the economics? No one's going to build the Top Hot Donut because it's a super inefficient building, and the next thing will be Collins Square. I'm just trying to understand, what role does the city have a say in and what it should not? Just be clear about it, because this could be interpreted that the city's getting involved.
Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you, Commissioner Krass. This is Commissioner Milligan. I agree, you're convincing me that design, including design here, seems problematic. I wanted to ask Kristen about, this is a goal, right?
It's a policy.
It's a policy. Okay, and where is it that we say that development will be, will reflect the nature of the properties adjacent?
We have it in about 3 different policies in the land use element.
Yeah, so we have something that says that that is already, and nobody argued about that, and that's even stricter than what you're saying, is that if you're building in this neighborhood, you have to put a building in that looks kind of like the neighborhood. That's already a design limitation.
Is that true, though? So I live,
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Where does that go?
I live in the first new modern, like in my neighborhood, I was the first modern house built. So if that was the policy,
Yeah.
it should never have been built.
Yeah, well, and so I'm dialing out to the other language. Where is it, and how does it relate to this, and when does it come into play? I'm feeling supportive of Commissioner Krass's concern that when we're outside HOAs where we don't have enforcement of self-enforcement, the neighborhood, you know, like the HOAs is self-enforcement. No, we want that in a neighborhood. And Issaquah Highlands is not paint color, by the way. There are 4 different housing types, and each little sub neighborhood has a housing type, and you have anyway. If we're saying, and if it were still important somewhere else in the document, that the development should adhere to what is already there to support the unique characteristic of the neighborhood, then, we wouldn't have this delightful mix that you get in some areas that aren't regulated, where you get a modern house right next to a craftsman house right next to a top pot donut with the brown thing. I love the top pot. Yeah. So I don't know.
So I have a couple of thoughts. One is that you can just stop with best practices. Say maintain, and we don't have to fix it now, but just some thoughts. Maintain and enhance each neighborhood's unique design and characteristic through best practices. What that is for each neighborhood depends on each neighborhood. Right.
Who's in favor of that? Show of hands. Chair Bader.
So on the piece of design, I had like an even broader interpretation of the word design, because we're talking about neighborhoods, we're not talking about houses. And so when I think of neighborhood design, it's like, is it walkable, right? Like, is it like what does like the landscaping look like, as like a broader kind of perception of design, and less so like what color is your individual house. And like, we had a saying when I worked in planning, albeit in like a completely different country, that like you can apply to like put the Eiffel Tower in your backyard and call it like your house, but like that doesn't mean it'll get approved, right? And so I feel like some of this protects from that, right? Like, so if your neighbor applied to build the Eiffel Tower in their backyard and called it a single family house, like like that can help, right? Like it just helps manage some of like that. It's not saying that like every single family house on the street has to look like every other single family house on the street. It could be like a modern single family house and a, older single family house, but there's still single family houses, right? And that like gets into some of that best practice. So I'm thinking of like design much more broadly in terms of like feel of the neighborhood as opposed to like the look of an individual building. So maybe it's like a clarity and definition thing
So,
too.
Kristen Lee said, I'm going to go back to Old Town, because that was to preserve the character. So houses started coming into Old Town that were 2 stories high, 2.5 stories high, that were really wide, that didn't have a whole lot of modulation, and they didn't fit the character of Old Town. And people said, we want to keep this character. We want our shorter houses. So we lowered the building height to a maximum of 25 feet. We don't want houses that have a garage, that are mostly garage with a little tiny door on the side. We want the garages to be more inconspicuous, either placed in the back if there's an alley, or, placed further back if there is no alley, so that you don't see it as much. There were just certain things that people asked for, and they weren't they did want color palette. So we put a color palette in there, but it's pretty broad. But that's what they meant by character. We don't want houses with just huge garages in the front. Let's find a way to keep those from coming in. We don't want 3-story flat roof buildings to come in that still meet the building height that's in place. So let's see if we can fix that. And flat roofs are still allowed, they're just lower. So that's what character was for Old Town.
Let me ask you this, Kristen, is the idea that eventually each zone will have its own plan, like Old Town?
Not each zone, but each neighborhood.
Each neighborhood. So the idea is there is going to be an underlying document eventually for each neighborhood. Because the way I see it, and I'm not a big person on regulations, but I actually agree that the language doesn't bother me, because I see it as more of like new development. And then again, I see those individual neighborhoods having their own policies when those eventually get written, 5 years down the road, that will kind of speak to some of those things in Old Town. But I'm thinking of Palace, Highlands, other areas. So again, the language, for me, it doesn't bother me.
So Old Town's, I guess, is a unique one. It's one of 15. I purposely am I'll pick either Central Issaquah or Issaquah Valley, which is a mixture of a whole bunch of different stuff. It comes back down to, it made me nervous that we have it must adhere to things that are already there, which if that's a policy, I think that's a thing we should understand a little bit more, because it's not the case. Otherwise, things will never get built. So I am curious, and let's forget Old Town for a second. Let's say Central Issaquah Valley. How would this, in reality, go forward of setting these types of things? You put something out there for any volunteers, and then do you have to have a certain amount of votes to say what a regulation or a guideline is? It opens up a lot of questions.
So this one's easy because we already have it for Central Issaquah. We
Okay.
have architectural standards for Central Issaquah. And it actually dictates different styles that you can do.
Okay.
And it does have a color palette. And so it's in place, and it is done administratively now.
And wouldn't, it'd go through the same process the Old Town, I'll bring it back, Old Town went through, which is, again, it goes through a public hearing. It's not that it's just the city dictating by, 2 or 3 people commenting, oh, this is what I want to see in my neighborhood. It's a whole process before these plans are put together. People have comment period, people have time. And that's really not, I don't think it's more or less about stifling creativity. It's just saying certain things are unacceptable here. Again, I think, anyone want to continue, or do we want to show of hands? Vice Chair Bader.
Just one other comment, just on the language in here, that it's not saying that each neighborhood, we're going to lock in like their unique design characteristics for all time and not be able to like ever change, right? It's saying maintain and enhance, and it's unique design characteristics, right? It's not like, let's make everything look exactly the same in a neighborhood because we decided this neighborhood needs to look this way. So I also I think it's fine to cut it after best practices, but I don't have a issue with the language. Granted, I live in an HOA, so like my choices are no longer mine, but I feel like the language here isn't saying, I think that there's like no opportunity to like do anything different. It's saying like preserve the characteristics, right? The feel of the neighborhood, not necessarily like get a cookie cutter look.
Right. And that's why I was suggesting cutting it after best practices, because, not every neighborhood's going to want it. You're going to walk into, some neighborhood and they go, no, let people build it. We don't care. The character of our area, of our neighborhood, is that people build whatever they want to build. So maybe that's the unique character, But we do have direction from council, too, to protect the character of existing neighborhoods within the city. So.
Would anyone else like to speak? I think we could probably just show staff by hands who feels it's best to cut after best practices, take out design and development regulation. Yeah, basically after best practices, take the rest of that out. Who would prefer to keep it in? There you go. Okay. Who would like to take out design? Maybe if staff could present us with 2 options.
That's what
and then
we'll do.
because this is coming back to us again,
yeah.
and then we can read it as a group and see which one we like more.
Yeah.
This is a refining process, so more to go. It's a great debate.
And you guys thought policies might be boring. All right.
This is the planning policy I know. Half hour on language. I love it.
All right. Yeah, so I'm back to that was it. Thoughts? Is there anything that you think we're leaving out? We've gotten feedback on the individual policies and goal. Is there anything we're leaving out? Is there anything else that you need from us?
Vice Chair Bader.
Just a minor thing, because I didn't know we were going slide by slide when we were going. So on the goal for this section, or whatever the language. Oh, this is not what I'm. Never mind. Apparently, I'm referring to another part of our agenda. So, this comment was, I like this goal. So never mind. This is what happens when I let my laptop.
Commissioner Patterson.
Thank you, Commissioner Patterson. The question I had on this one, or comment, was the word establish. So I understand that we need to develop neighborhood plans, but then it says the aim to establish welcoming, attractive, and walkable neighborhoods, which I think alludes to the idea that we don't have that right now, which I think we've also establish that we do have these neighborhoods and they do have existing character and existing characteristics. They just haven't been documented yet, which is, I think, where the developed neighborhood plans part comes in. So my comment on this would be to remove or reword the idea of establishing that.
In hand.
Yeah, I mean, for myself, I kind of see this as this is plan going forward. That word in itself doesn't bother me, but anyone else have follow-up? Vice Chair Bader.
I found my reference. It was to the vision. It was in our memo. Like the neighborhoods retain their charm and distinct character. I don't know where that fits in all of this, if that's vision for this element, or if that's an old goal.
Oh, I think the one I put, sorry, I don't have it with me.
It's
I think the one I put in there
objective
referred to
GD1.
these, that's from the strategic plan,
Okay.
the one I just referred to.
All right, final comments? I'll just quickly say, Chair Voice, I think it's great. I can see why people were probably upset with the prior two maps. So these look to almost be, if not identical, so that's wonderful. The only question I have, and I don't think it's an issue, but I'm going to ask anyway. There's two sub areas, which will now be two neighborhoods that are no longer contiguous. Is that a problem? Does that present you guys any problems? So Newport
Oh,
and Tiger Mountain. I just wondered, as far as planning, as far as communication, does that actually throw a wrench in anything?
Tiger Mountain's been that way for years. We can rename one if you want. It hasn't been, it's not an issue for us because there's no development there. They
Okay.
are permanent open space. So that's why that hasn't caused an issue for us. Newport, we would probably change the road. Right now, it's on the line is on the east side of the road. We'd probably change it to the west side of the road, so at least it's connected by that. But it shouldn't.
Yeah, I just didn't know how it worked with like city funding or anything like that.
No, this doesn't affect funding or design or development or anything like that. It just is really for planning and discussion purposes.
Okay.
But it has caused frustration and confusion.
The different
Yeah.
maps, yeah.
Yeah.
Big improvement. Any final thoughts on this portion of tonight's meeting? All right, well, thank you, Kristen.
Okay.
Looks like you're going to be presenting for our second item,
I am.
which is a discussion on the update of the land use element. So please.
We brought the first draft of the land use element to you on August 24th. And just as we did with the housing element, we've gone back and addressed your comments and made those changes. And we want to make sure that our changes accurately reflect what you all asked for. And we're still going to need some help with one of these. So the first one was that you all preferred, on goal L, prefer the language of regional leader. So we put aim to be a regional leader back in there. L3 removes specifics regarding siting, and this is for compact schools. And actually, we are going to revert back and we are going to leave all of the original language in there for L3 through L6. We had deleted a couple of those, changed a couple of those, and we are just going to leave it all as is right now, just to ensure that we go back through the development code and make sure that we have everything in the development code that is listed here before we take these policies, before we take any of the specifics out. Goal M, this is where we need some more help, particularly perhaps from Commissioner Bader. The direction was that it seems to be missing opportunity, and you were going to give that some more thought. Okay, great.
Yeah, so I gave it more thought, but I also was like wishy-washy, because what I was trying to get at was that I think allowing for an accommodating growth that is just fiscally responsive to the and enhancing the environment doesn't feel like enough. So I also want growth that like promotes opportunity for residents or something like that. That's the best language that I could come up with, but it's like, how is our growth creating opportunity for like jobs that residents can do, right? How is our opportunity creating like places for residents to like play and have access to like, you know, it's kind of like the live, work, and play piece, right? Like health, all of that. It just felt like that kind of like level of direction for like the type of growth we are allowing and accommodating for was needed. So where I landed was like promotes opportunity for residents, but I don't know if that's like would be clear to anyone without like all of the rest.
Commissioners, anybody want to help out refine Vice Chair Bader's message? Commissioner Milligan.
Anna Milligan, thank you, Sarah. I like your word. Right there.
Can you repeat all that? Okay. Anybody else?
Okay.
Commissioner Krass?
And add economic opportunity, because you already have most of those pieces. Kind of covers almost all the pieces. Misses that one economic opportunity. Because it's responsive to the community, natural environment, fiscally responsible, because of course you got to be. I think it covers everything. Very wordy, but you said it well. Wrote it in there.
So are we kind of sitting on opportunity for growth or economic or do you want it to be more specific or opportunity for growth?
Yeah, I have, my language was just promotes opportunity because I think economic is part of it. I also think that there's like the like opportunity for health, like opportunity for like well-being and all of that stuff.
It promotes opportunity for residents.
I know that's like very like probably vague policy language.
So I think you either have to be, if you're vague, then it's open to lots of interpretations, or you put a bunch of examples like be wordy.
I don't think it's a problem to be wordy, right? These are basically policy goals.
Yeah,
And it's not code.
I think it's okay to be wordy.
Yeah.
Be
And
more-
this one is a goal.
Right.
So if it becomes too much, we can always add policies and we'll work on it and bring back another draft of this one.
Okay. Great start. Thank you, Vice Chair Bader.
Okay, policy L10 include how to keep education programs in the policy. So we reworked this one quite a bit. We deleted L10, but created 2 new policies because in L10 it talked about sustainability, but the goal talks about sustainability and the last part of this policy talks about environmental sustainability. So we deleted kind of the bulk of it and then said X12 would be administer creekside and wetland restoration programs that improve habitat and decrease flooding potential, which was part of that previous policy, and then provide public education programs that offer an easily accessible source of information regarding the public stewardship role in a sustainable community. I think that gets at what you all were looking at.
Comments there? Okay.
Here, we were just asked to clarify it, and we just took out the word with and said, support the urban core's development as a regional growth center by allowing and encouraging the density mix of uses and amenities. X2, you just asked us to remove and families, which made sense, so we did. Check changes and reference for Title 18. We will continue to do this throughout. One of those would be the school, the compact schools. So we will continue to do that as we do this. And if you guys, since you worked on Title 18, if you catch anything that we don't, please let us know. Okay? Additional emergency preparedness and policies, are they needed? The additional policies, those are really more appropriate for the actual management plans through the emergency services group. So I think we're covered there. This one wasn't in your packet, but we changed it. So I added it back in here, policy 05. We just simplified it because there was no need to list them out. So just design and create trails, sidewalks, bikeways, and paths to increase connectivity by providing comfortable, convenient, and safe links throughout the community, period. So, because you really want them everywhere, not just these that are listed. And that's it. Any questions? And do these reflect correctly what you all asked us to do?
Commissioners,
All right,
getting some head nods. I think you're on the right path.
great. All right, then that is all I have. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kristen. Appreciate those presentations. All right, we're going to move on to basically our last item of business, which is reports. Are there any city council updates that staff would like to provide?
I'm glad that Minnie came. Do you have any
I
updates?
see Minnie
that
over
you'd
there.
Not really. You all went to the Planning Development Committee and took your recommendation on the housing element and the reason, there was another item for fixing a codifying error piece that you held the public hearing on, and that is passed on. It is on the council agenda for the 18th to adopt. The other things going on with council at this time, we are going back to them on October 9th with the permit process timelines. What data we have, what we're doing, what we've analyzed and addressed some of the issues to meet our target goals. So we're focused on that aspect of it, and we'll be talking to them on October 9th. We have a presentation coming up with the Equity Board on October 4th, which is not a council update, but related to the comp plan, as well as the whole city has an equity framework, and each department is taking one project and putting it through the equity framework. And for us, it was how do we notify public over land use applications? And using that as an example, we're going to go through and see and give feedback on the framework, whether we are doing it right or how we can, meet the framework, but also the 13 questions in the framework and really giving them on the framework itself. Other items?
No, this is Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner. I did want to clarify, though, when Minnie was talking about the Planning Development Environmental Committee, the public hearing piece is going through the council, but they did have items that they wanted us to bring back to you and revisit regarding the housing element. So all the elements are actually going to go together at once through council, but they did have some suggestions to come back this way.
All right, well, thank you, Minnie. Appreciate it. All right, our final piece of the evening. Are there any other business or announcements from staff as far as the city concerned? Anything exciting? All of our fun summer events have finished. Going in towards the dark fall. That's right, Salmon Days is coming up. Thank you. A bit of optimism. The only little comment I had is I did notice in the matrix that talks for public comment, general public comment, there was one particular person that made quite a few, and I couldn't tell if it was their edits. I mean, I could, but it was a little difficult to decipher. So I'm sure you saw that. I don't know if there's anything you can help us out, because reading them, like I said, it was going back and forth. Is this their edits? Who's staff responding to right now? Or is this edits that you made? I think someone got a hold of your program and went through and started redlining things and highlighting things.
Someone asked for a Word version of the of the matrix, and then went through and did make some edits, and we accepted some, but not all. So the edits that are in there were recommended by the public.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
less about the substance, more
Yeah.
about the color scheme. That just
Yeah,
did,
and
like you said.
yes.
So
Yeah.
I think that's all I have. Anybody else? Any last comments? Anything for the good of the order? Planning Policy Commission. All right, well, I want to thank everybody for attending, and we will adjourn this meeting of the Planning Policy at 7:25 p.m. Thank you.